Welcome back to Boilers and Beyond. I am your host, Jordan Jones. It's been a busy few days in the world of college sports, from conferences beginning to announce their schedules for football season, and the NBA draft withdrawal deadline having come and gone yesterday. There was plenty of news to go around. Today's episode will be focused on the latter, as we'll take a final look back at the Big Ten basketball offseason now that draft decisions have been made and finalized. I'd like to wait a little bit until the Big Ten announces their football schedule to start breaking down more of football season and what that's going to look like here in the fall of 2020. Before we get into Big Ten basketball, however, let's hit some of the bigger pieces of news from this past week. Purdue football finally added another commitment for the first time in a few weeks here. 2021 prospect Ricky Smith committed to the Boilermakers last week. Smith is a 6'1", 195-pound defensive athlete from Orlando, Florida. He's listed by Rivals as a 3-star safety. He is an unrated outside linebacker on 24/7. So a little bit of disparity there in terms of his rating and his position overall on defense, but he had some other Power 5 offers looking at Miami, Florida, Ole Miss, and West Virginia. I don't know a ton about him. His film is a little bit unconclusive. He missed a lot of his junior season due to injury, only played in 3 games down in the Sunshine State this past year. But this brings Purdue's 2021 class up to 9 commitments now. Obviously, they want to keep building on that to ultimately get above 20, by December into January, somewhere in there, since the early signing period starts in December. Also in football recruiting news, last night on Twitter, 2021 target Yanni Karlaftis delays his commitment date. He was originally scheduled to commit this upcoming Sunday, August 9th. The younger brother of Purdue standout defensive end George Karlaftis is going to be deciding between Purdue, Wisconsin, Cal, and Oregon. Look, I don't really have any intel on the situation on why Karlaftis is delaying his decision or what to expect when he does make his decision, but it is clear this probably isn't what any of these schools were hoping for. This is a huge target for Purdue. This means more to Purdue than it does to any other school who is targeting Karlaftis. The family connection there with his brother George, and the fact that, during a pandemic, Purdue's recruiting a player who goes to school a couple blocks away from Ross-Ade Stadium rather than a couple states away in Wisconsin or a couple time zones away in the 2 Pac-12 schools. Purdue would love to land him. We'll see what goes on there and how long he delays his decision for, but it is something to keep an eye on at least as we get into high school football season. As some other conferences have announced their scheduling plans, the Big Ten has not released a schedule yet, only has said that they will be playing 10 games, conference only, and they originally had targeted for a September 5th start. I don't know if that's still the case. Every other conference which is announced has targeted a later start date than what the Big Ten originally had targeted, but, I don't know. This is going to be the interesting part of pandemic scheduling with the conference-only games. If we have a bit of a staggered start, it could look really, really weird. Could be kind of fun. I don't really know, but it's going to be fascinating to see how that unravels. The Big Ten also said that these schools cannot begin official, full pad contact practice until the conference office gives them the all clear. I don't understand this. If they're going to start on September 5th, today is August 4th. I just don't know that I see how that works. If they're not in pads yet, I have a tough time thinking that they're playing football in just over a month from today. But Again, we'll see. A lot of news will likely break this week after I upload this episode, so hopefully we can be back here next week to break down it all. Finally, a piece of basketball recruiting news that I know Purdue fans far and wide have been paying attention to, and that is five-star target in the 2021 class, Harrison Ingram, released his final list of 6 schools. That was Purdue, Stanford, North Carolina, Michigan, Howard, and Harvard. Ingram said his next step is a commitment that he will not be making any additional cuts. It is significant. Duke had expressed some interest recently during the quarantine period, but they did not offer and ultimately did not make Ingram's final 6. Doesn't necessarily mean Duke is completely out of the picture. We've seen too many recruits end up going somewhere that we didn't expect them to at the very end, but it is worth noting that Duke did not make his final 6. You know, I say it on the show almost every single week based on recruiting news, but Purdue only has 1 open scholarship remaining. Oversigning is a whole nother story. Could Purdue do it? Yes, that does complicate things, however, because I don't see anyone leaving early to go pro off of this roster to free up a scholarship, but it is a possibility. 1 open scholarship remaining. Ingram would be the highest rated recruit to come to Purdue in the recruiting ranking, Rivals 24/7, Scout.com. In that era, he would be the highest rated recruit to come to Purdue, and probably the only one even comparable would be Glenn Robinson. Massive get for Purdue should Ingram come to West Lafayette. There is still a lot of time to go on this decision, in my opinion. This is a big, drawn-out recruitment. Ingram is going to get quite a bit of attention, particularly from the 4 major schools that are courting him at this point. Howard and Harvard, obviously a little more unconventional. Howard is becoming more popular among top recruits. We've seen a top 10 recruit in the 2020 class enroll there now, but it'll be cool to follow how many of these top recruits in 2021 end up taking the HBCU pattern. Just something to keep an eye on there, but Ingram is obviously going to be a massive target for Purdue. Matt Painter is not going to take the brakes or take the gas pedal off on him anytime soon, and we'll continue to follow that on this show up until a commitment date for Harrison Ingram. All right, now we will get into today's topic, and that is the Big Ten basketball offseason review. Now that we have finished the NBA draft process with the evaluation, with the NBA Combine, and the decision deadline has passed. It is worth pointing out this is the first year in a while that I can remember in a good long time that the Big Ten has had 0 head coaching changes during this offseason. I know Richard Pitino may have been the closest one, but Minnesota was adamant very quickly that they were bringing him back for another year. We're not going to get into that. We'll break down Minnesota here in a little bit, but for Purdue, they did not have any players pursue early entry. No Gel Eastern did. As far as I know, he has withdrawn from the draft. Never made anything public on Twitter about his withdrawal, but I believe he is withdrawing from the draft and looking to find somewhere to play his final year of eligibility, be that this season or next season. But we had an entire podcast dedicated to the transfers of Matt Harms and No Gel Eastern. You can go back wherever you get your podcasts and find that in our library. There's just a lot of roster continuity returning for Purdue, and we've done another podcast about that as well. So we're going to spend most of the show today focusing on the rest of the Big Ten, but Purdue had one of the quieter off seasons, albeit the transfers of Harms and Eastern, and they're set up all right to have a successful year just with a very continuous roster coming back and Some good talent coming back, too. It's worth pointing out that this is a very talented Purdue team that hopefully is going to get Purdue back in the top half to top third of the Big Ten and back in a position to compete for a Big Ten championship. The biggest name in Big Ten basketball and the biggest domino fell on Sunday when Iowa center Luka Garza announced his return to Iowa City. Garza was a first-team All-American and the Big Ten Player of the Year in 2019-2020 season. Unbelievable player, averaged 23.9 points a game, nearly 10 rebounds, shot 54% from the field and 35% from three. There is no exaggerating how big of a return this is for Fran McCaffery's Hawkeyes. This is a team that goes from a likely tournament team without Garza to a likely preseason top 5 team and the unquestioned favorite to win the Big Ten preseason. Garza is all everything. He will be the preseason National Player of the Year. He will be the preseason Big Ten Player of the Year. He is going to get a ton of accolades. You know, he's one of those players that is going to dominate college, but in all reality, likely will not dominate in the NBA. Just the way the NBA moves, part of the reason the NBA is unwatchable, in my opinion, is that some of these guys are just unable to succeed, even though they're fantastic basketball players, because of the league's one-on-one nature. And yeah, but Garza is going to be a fantastic player for Iowa this year. We saw Purdue really struggle with him last year, even though Purdue did not struggle with the rest of the Hawkeyes team. Iowa's going to be great. If Fran McCaffery can coach this team on defense, which he has seemingly not done ever in his tenure at Iowa, but if this can be a team that can hold their own on defense, I think Iowa could be a team that doesn't leave the top 10 in the AP poll all season long. Another team in the Big Ten that had a heck of a weekend was the Illinois Fighting Illini, as junior-to-be point guard Ayo Dosunmu announced his return on Friday night. Dosunmu, the Chicago product, led the Illini with 16.5 points a game and just over 3 assists a game last year. Good floor general for the Illini, shot 75% at the foul line, 48% from the field. You know, Dosunmu's return is big. He is a clear preseason first-team all-conference player. Had a great year last year, a guy who made some really solid strides from his freshman to sophomore year. I like his game quite a bit. He's a game changer. We saw him with, I remember, a last-second shot against Michigan last year. Might have had some more in there, but a really strong player. The Illini are in a good position, especially after the sophomore-to-be center, Kofi Cockburn, announced his return one day later on Saturday. Cockburn is going to be the second-best center in the conference behind Garza. I'm sorry, Purdue fans. I do think that Garza and Kofi Cockburn are both better than Travion Williams. Purdue Twitter would love to debate me on this, I am sure, but it's a fact at this point. They're far more proven than Travion Williams is, and both had better years last year. Cockburn had over 13 a game, nearly 9 rebounds a game last year. Just a grown man down low for the Illini. 53% from the field. As a center, I think Illinois would like to see that improve. I think it will improve. Good area to point out, Cockburn was 68% at the foul line as a freshman. For a freshman big man, that's very impressive. And if you look at Purdue, that's better than both Purdue's big men did last year as well, particularly Travion Williams, who was below 50%. Again, Cockburn just dominated a lot of Big Ten big men on the glass, particularly Purdue's. We saw it at Mackey Arena. I remember the tip-off, and then I remember looking up very soon after, and Kofi Cockburn already had 6 rebounds. It was like that. Very quick. Dosunmu and Cockburn are going to form the best 1-2 punch in the conference. Iowa doesn't have a player who goes with Garza, as well as Illinois has 2 guys who go well together in Dosunmu and Cockburn. They're going to join very talented returning pieces in Trent Frazier, who feels like he's been there forever now, back for his senior season on the outside. Big man Georgi Bashanishvili returns for his junior season. DeMonte Williams, a strong lockdown defender. And you have a very good recruiting class down to Champaign, including highly touted guard from Chicago, Adam Miller. This will be Illinois' most talented team since the 2005 group that went to the national title game and only lost 2 games with D. Brown, Darren Williams, Luther Hudd. Very, very good team. Big Ten is going to run through Iowa City and very soon after that be Champaign. Great, great matchups between Illinois and Iowa coming this year. Going to be fantastic basketball. Now, finally, the last team in the Big Ten that had a lot of weight riding on NBA Decision Day was Tom Izzo's Michigan State team. Aaron Henry, going to be a junior in East Lansing, is coming back to take that season to his advantage. He scored 10 a game last year in a backcourt dominated by Cassius Winston, the All-Big Ten first-team player and former Big Ten Player of the Year in 2019. Had 4.5 rebounds a game and over 3 assists a game. He's an Indianapolis native from Ben Davis High School. People in the Indianapolis and state as a whole will remember him from his days there. Henry made a heck of a leap from his freshman to sophomore seasons. Another leap is likely coming. I'm really high on this kid. Think he's a very strong player and a guy who really is going to be rock steady for Michigan State. He may not make the most, Carson Edwards-esque plays, but he is rock solid, more of an Etuan Moore type who is really just going to be consistent and get buckets for the Spartans this year. They do lose big man Xavier Tillman. He forgoes his senior season to stay in the NBA draft. Tillman was the Defensive Player of the Year in the conference this past year, as well as earning all Big Ten honors. Scored over 13.5 a game, pulled down 7.5 boards, and shot 60% from the field. Very, very strong season from Tillman. He's a father to 2 children. I understand his decision to stay in the draft. Those are some real-world things you have to take care of. You need that money to take care of kids the way Tillman has to. And I also don't know how much his draft stock could have improved. We've seen this quite a bit from big men in the past who are not your prototypical NBA big men, that are a little bit more stuck. They're in college, they're dominating, but they're going to go to the NBA and the scouts don't like how they look in the NBA. Kind of where Tillman's at, in my opinion, but his loss does create some question marks in the post for Izzo's team. 4-star recruit Matty Sissoko is going to help with that. But, Marcus Bingham was underwhelming last year when he would come on the floor for Tillman. Bingham needs to get a lot bigger, really bulk up to hang down low with some of the Big Ten's best big men like Kofi Coburn and Luka Garza. You do have Michigan State adding Marquette transfer Joey Hauser from the transfer wire. He sat this past year after leaving the Golden Eagles along with his brother Sam, who is at Virginia. Hauser is going to start at the 3 for Michigan State this year, I believe. Very strong player. Got out of Marquette for unspecified reasons that I'm sure had nothing to do with Marcus Howard taking over 20 shots a game. But Hauser, coming off a red shirt, will join a very talented team with Rocket Watts, Gabe Brown, Malik Hall, all joining Aaron Henry. This is going to be a team that can shoot the ball from the outside and has some real playmakers on the wing. There's one piece down low away from really being right up there with Illinois and Iowa as Big Ten favorites. This is a team built to compete again yet in the Big Ten and make a push in March the way Tom Izzo has done so many times. Other news in the Big Ten, most of these schools didn't have decisions with the weight of the top 3 schools in Illinois, Iowa, and Michigan State. Minnesota does return guard Marcus Carr for his junior season. The product out of Canada really stuffed the stat sheet last year in a way I don't know that I necessarily appreciated enough. Having over 15 a game, 5 rebounds, and 6.5 assists in his sophomore season. He was fantastic against the Boilermakers in Mackey when he had 27 points before fouling out in the double overtime loss back in January. I said it on Twitter, his return means he is bound to go off against Purdue next year because that's what Minnesota guards do. In the replies, had a nice conversation with Travis Miller of Hammer and Rails. Nate Mason, his eruption in Mackey back in 2017 that completely ruined a 28-22 effort from Caleb Swanigan. Looking back at Blake Hoffarber's 23-point performance to upset a top 10 Purdue team back in 2011. Minnesota guards just have their way of going off against Purdue, especially now here in the Richard Pitino era. But, Marcus Carr will form a really nice backcourt combo with fellow junior guard Gabe Kalsher. That's going to be a backcourt that's going to put up a lot of shots. They do lose Daniel Oturu. That is a killer. Oturu was a machine for the Golden Gophers last year. 20 points, 11 rebounds a game just as a sophomore. He's another name in the list of the dominant Big Ten centers from this past year. He is going pro. No-brainer decision. There is no way you are going to improve your draft stock after you average 20 and 11 just as a sophomore. Good move by Oturu. We're now entering year 8 for Richard Pitino in Minneapolis. Only 2 NCAA tournament appearances to show for it. It is time to get back there for the Golden Gophers. Minnesota's a tough program because they don't have a lot of history in basketball. I don't know what the expectations are, but I would imagine that Minnesota fans are starting to lose their patience a little bit. That was too good of a team last year to struggle as much as they did. If I remember correctly, they were playing on the Wednesday of the Big Ten tournament. That's probably not acceptable with Marcus Carr, Gabe Kalsher, and Daniel Oturu on your roster. It is time for Pitino to step up and really get some stuff done up in Minneapolis. Another team that is known for underachieving, the Maryland Terrapins, lose their top 2 players now that forward Jalen Sticks Smith is continuing his career professionally, will not be returning to Maryland for his junior year. Had over 15 points a game and over 10 rebounds a game last year as a sophomore when he made a fantastic leap from his freshman to sophomore seasons. Really dominant player for the Terrapins this past year. Really made his three-point shot a lot better, knocked down over 35% of those shots, and made a heck of a combo with senior guard Anthony Cowan, who also departs the Terrapins program. College Park is going to be seeking some more playmakers this year. They have some experienced guards. They are not all that experienced in carrying a team, however. Looking at Aaron Wiggins, Daryl Morcell, Eric Ayala, and Dante Scott, all returning in the backcourt, but they were all second fiddle to Anthony Cowan in the backcourt last year, and a third option behind Cowan and Smith in scoring for the Terrapins last year. Turgeon needs to continue to develop this team, continue to add playmakers to hang with the top schools in the Big Ten. Ohio State, Chris Holtman's Buckeyes lose their leading scorer and rebounder Caleb Wesson to the draft after his junior season. He tested the waters after his sophomore year in 2019, elected to return, and in my opinion, just never seemed fully bought in to coming back to school. I always thought he was a situation of a guy who really wanted to be a pro player, but wasn't quite highly touted enough from the pro scouts to make it right away. This time he is leaving for good. This is going to be a really small team this upcoming season. They have a lot of good guards. They do not have much proven at center or at a big power forward position. Chris Holtman is a fantastic coach. He will figure it out, I am sure, but it's going to be interesting to see what Holtman does and what buttons he can push to make up for some serious size in the Ohio State front court. Ohio State ready to make another big step. They were fantastic in Holtman's first season, led by Keita Bates-Diop. Kind of fallen off the past 2 years. Ohio State fans are ready to get back in the top 4, top 5 of the Big Ten and compete for the second weekend of the NCAA tournament. Elsewhere in the Big Ten, Nebraska has to replace their top 3 scorers now after a underreported story this offseason. They had graduated their top scorer in senior transfer guard Hanif Cheatham, but they also lost their second and third scorers, Deshaun Burke and Cam Mack, who Purdue fans are still having nightmares of from his performance at Lincoln last year when Nebraska thoroughly defeated Purdue back in December. This is a program that is very built on transfers. That is how Fred Hoiberg thrived at Iowa State. It worked in the Big 12. I will give him that. It worked very well. How well is that going to work in the Big 10? When you're losing 2 of your top 3 scorers to transfer after they transfer into the program, it doesn't sound good. It's not a good look for your school. I don't know that I get this one bit. Just a reminder here, Nebraska is the same school that fired Tim Miles in basketball and fired Bo Pelini in football for going 9-3 every year. What has Nebraska football done since then? They've done nothing. This might be a tough situation where Nebraska fired 2 coaches they probably shouldn't have fired in not very long of a time span. Nebraska gets one of their top 6 scorers back. That's senior guard Thorir Thorbjarnason. He's the only returner who scored more than 6 points a game last year. Nebraska is going to struggle again this year, and Hoiberg is really behind the 8 ball in a conference that continues to get better and better every year. It was an interesting offseason for the Boilermakers' friends down south in Bloomington. They got great news early on in the offseason when sophomore forward Trace Jackson Davis took his name out of the NBA draft as soon as he put it in it, seemingly, announcing his return to Assembly Hall. The former Indiana Mr. Basketball averaged 13.5 a game and more than 8 rebounds a game in his freshman season. Really does have a limited game outside of the paint, not much of a shooter. If he can develop a little bit more outside, he could be a great player for Indiana this year and really be a key piece in bringing the Hoosiers back to the NCAA tournament. But it was interesting to see senior-to-be Justin Smith leave the Indiana program as a graduate transfer to play his final season down in Fayetteville for the Arkansas Razorbacks. I don't necessarily understand this. Smith scored 10.5 a game, over 5 rebounds for the Hoosiers as a junior. I don't know what he sees at Arkansas that he wasn't going to have at Indiana. All signs pointed to Smith starting for the Hoosiers again this year. I think this is a very lateral move to an Arkansas program that has more or less struggled lately. Eric Musselman, a good coach down there, still working to build that back up to compete with Kentucky in the SEC. But, the pressure's on Archie Miller now. Trace Jackson Davis returns. They get another solid piece in Joey Brunk back in their front court. Now the pressure's on Miller to develop his guards because they're going to have a solid front court. They need to have guards who can knock down shots to keep defenses honest and keep them from going pack line on Indiana all game long. Up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, the Wolverines and coach Juwan Howard got a very good piece of news 2 weeks ago, as forward Isaiah Livers will be coming to Ann Arbor for his senior season after testing the waters in the NBA draft. That was a really good end to what had been a rough offseason for Howard's Wolverines. Commit Isaiah Todd, a 5-star recruit, announced earlier on in the quarantine period that he would be foregoing his college eligibility to pursue the G League's Pathway program for the high school players. And they also lost out on top 10 prospect Josh Christopher, who will be attending Arizona State instead of Michigan, kind of the top two schools it came down to there. Tough offseason in the recruiting path for Juwan Howard, and what is becoming more or less the danger of recruiting some of these highly touted prospects, with Christopher not deciding until, I believe, April, and Isaiah Todd, switching over at the 11th hour to go play professional ball in a very new, very questionable setting. But Liver's return is very important for the Wolverines. Scored 13 points a game, pulled down 4 boards a game for Michigan this past year. Should have a really solid season. They have some solid returnees up in Ann Arbor. You're looking at Eli Brooks and David DeJulius in the backcourt. Looking at Franz Wagner in the front court alongside Isaiah Livers. They do lose a little bit with point guard Xavier Simpson and center John Teskey graduating, but Howard moving into year 2 in Ann Arbor, I do think the future is bright. He's a popular coach. He's going to recruit very well, and he has a strong assistant staff as well. I know there's a few teams I didn't touch on here in this episode. I just wanted to keep focus on the teams that had a lot of turnover or had a player of significance withdraw from the NBA draft or stay in the NBA draft. But Wisconsin returns nearly everything. They're going to be fantastic this next season. They did lose their leading scorer at the time mid-season last year in Kobe King. He was originally committed to Nebraska to play and then backed out of that. If I saw where he's going to play next year, I don't remember. Someone tweeted at me if you know, but Wisconsin's going to be fantastic. I believe they get all their starters back next year to a team that just won the Big Ten championship. Yes, Purdue fans, Brad Davison is still at Wisconsin. He is going to be a senior, I believe, but Davison is that guy who has seemed like he has been there forever, and he will especially feel that way when he takes the court in Madison this year. Elsewhere, Rutgers, really quiet offseason, probably a good thing. Rutgers had their breakthrough year in the Big Ten this year, would have been a tournament team if it were not for the coronavirus shutting down the NCAA tournament. They will be very strong next year, led by guard Geo Baker. I am very high on Coach Steve Peichel. I think he has been fantastic in Piscataway, replacing Eddie Jordan, who did absolutely nothing for the Scarlet Knights. Now Rutgers has a bright future in basketball, and it has been so long since you could say that, going back to the Jim Valvano days in the early 70s. Elsewhere, there's not much in the Big Ten. Penn State loses a ton from this past year, particularly Lamar Stevens, very talented forward who was one of the very tough stories of college basketball being canceled. He was one game away from breaking the Penn State all-time scoring record, and then the tournament gets shut down, misses out on that chance to break the all-time scoring record. I think he was 6 or 8 points away or something like that. But I do expect a lot of regression from the Nittany Lions this year. They would have been a tournament team. I don't know that I see that again this year, but Pat Chambers has done a heck of a job recruiting to that program, really starting to get into Philadelphia and pulling players that Penn State has never been able to pull before. And finally, the only team I haven't touched on at this point is the Northwestern Wildcats. Look, I don't have anything to say about Northwestern. I don't anticipate any step forward. Northwestern and Nebraska are going to occupy the league's basement again this year. And I think Northwestern is going to be fascinating in the one sense that we're going to know the answer to the question, how important was the one tournament that Chris Collins made in Evanston? Northwestern had never made the tournament prior to the 2017 NCAA Big Dance, where they took down Vanderbilt in the first round before losing to Gonzaga. Outside of that season, they followed it up with a lot of the same players, really struggling the next season, might not have even had a winning record in a Big Ten that was very weak outside of the top 3. And, ever since, I think Northwestern's been in the basement back-to-back years now. The real question is, how much loyalty is Northwestern administration going to show to Chris Collins based off of that one season? There was a lot of content in this week's episode. We broke down every team in the Big Ten and looked at what their offseason looked like a little bit. We're going to be back next week with the audience Q&A session. We're going to pass on that today, along with more of the biggest news and high-level analysis from the world of Purdue athletics. Remember to follow the show on Twitter at BoilersBeyond to stay up to date on Purdue sports and ask questions to be answered on next week's show. You can also email the show at boilersandbeyondpod@gmail.com. Thank you for listening to today's show. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe, give us a 5-star review. It would be much appreciated. Until next week, stay safe.